Amy Hennig said it best. The medium of video games is a very complex one that is just now learning to walk. 10, 20 years from now, I can't imagine what kind of advancements they'll have and how predominant they'll become. But when I personally turn on my console, I want to play a story and I want to have fun. But I want to have that experience through the lens of a story I myself am pushing forward. And when that works, when every piece of the writing and gameplay comes together, that creates an entertainment medium that is more immersive than anything else by far. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, your nihilistic optimist, and while I've focused my channel up on superhero movies recently, something I do intend to stick to, I still can't help but talk about other things that I love. Does that mean I'll make a video essay or review for Andor? I don't know, that all depends on if I have something to say. Yet The Last of Us is a property I feel like I have to talk about, and from the title of this video you already know why that is, that no matter how good the show is, it physically cannot be as good as the game, which obviously involves spoilers for the first season and game. But before getting there, I want to take a step back and look at video game adaptations in general, because they haven't had the best of runs, to the point that I began to think video game movies and TV shows would just have better luck telling a separate story that takes inspiration from the games, and shouldn't be one-to-one translations. And we'll circle back around to that idea, because that might be important, but every new dud proved that sentiment right time after time, and there are earlier, worse examples, but I still remember the fever dream that was the live-action Mario movie in the 90s, which, to give it credit, did try to fashion the Mario lore into something new and cyberpunk. Was that the correct direction to take the movie? Not even a little bit, but it showed me how interested I could be in a video game adaptation that skewed the story quite a bit. Unfortunately, though it is undeniably terrible, not everyone holds that movie with the same cult classic status that I do. But another more modern day example that kinda used the game lore while also kinda making its own story is Assassin's Creed, which could have and should have been better, but I think that movie's biggest offense was just how boring it was. I guess I could have rewatched it to make sure that was the case, but I saw that movie once, and frankly, once was too many. Yet everyone's got their guilty pleasure video game movie. Maybe it's Assassin's Creed, maybe it's Uncharted, maybe it's Mortal Kombat, but all in all, they're just not great. Recently, the Amazon Fallout show did really well, and I think that success can be credited to the showrunner's storytelling talent combined with a reverence for the source material. Not that an adaptation has to take place in the same world as the original game, but it does help. Logically, it's a nightmare to try and line up every context clue so it doesn't break the timeline or canon, but that effort is something that is noticed and appreciated immediately, and is impossible to fake. And another not as great example is Detective Pikachu, and though I don't have too much good stuff to say about that movie, it is undoubtedly fun. And that fun is drawn from the clear love that the filmmakers had for Pokemon. And speaking of love for the source material, I can't bring up video game movies without stepping on the landmine that is Sonic. The first of which was more of a throwback to the classic early 2000s era of terrible adaptations, making it into a road trip comedy, though if you put aside the stupid premise that a character with super speed needs help getting to a destination because he doesn't know the directions, then it kinda works. If nothing else, there's Jim Carrey bringing an energy that would be sorely missed without him, one that only gets stronger as the trilogy goes on. The second and third of which are more one-to-one adaptations of a particular Sonic game. Do I know that for sure? No, the only Sonic game I've ever played is the classic that I got from the iOS store, so I shouldn't really be commenting on these movies in general since I haven't actually touched the games they're adapting, but that's what I've heard. And bringing all of those adaptations together, I know this might come as a shock, but not Assassin's Creed, not Detective Pikachu, or even Sonic could break through to the prestigious side of entertainment. Nothing related to video games could. I think Fallout has managed to break that curse, but a year before that, a little HBO project came out smashing through that glass ceiling first. Teaming Chernobyl's showrunner, who had an interesting comedic career beforehand, with the director of the video game, HBO pulled out all of the stops to finance and produce what was going to be a major release for them, on the level of Game of Thrones. Even before any footage was seen, everyone had a sneaking suspicion this might have been the one. It was HBO after all. They're the prestige average TV guys. Of course, The Last of Us isn't the only video game to overshadow the negatives that video games typically have, avoiding the usual immature connotation generally attached to them, yet The Last of Us is clearly one of the most popular examples to do so, featuring a surrogate father-daughter dynamic that has become so mainstream, people see any relationship even sort of similar to that as taking inspiration from Joel and Ellie, forgetting that the lone wolf and cub story is a long-used cliche originating I don't even know how long ago at this point, but a long time ago. And it's interesting because I have so many good things to say about the show, such as how it's arguably more dramatic than the game, considering it depicts the events with more of an omniscient point of view, being able to give focus and development to characters who can only play small roles in the game's narrative, requiring either the Left Behind DLC or a divisive decision in the second game that I won't spoil on the off chance you haven't played it. But those secondary, non-playable characters like Sam, Henry, Bill, or Frank could only ever get so much focus because we don't spend nearly as much time with them in the game. So getting to divide the show's runtime differently than the game to make some characters and storylines more important or dramatic cements these writers as some of the best out there, making already traumatic moments even more heartrending than before, because even a couple minutes of focus does more than you know for these characters. However, making the property into a TV show inherently gets rid of the one aspect that made the game so monumentally groundbreaking, that being that when you are playing the game, you are Joel, which is enforced more with every heart-wrenching section of the story, and that is particularly special because it is all in this prestigious format in a medium that, as I've covered earlier, hadn't historically done well with genuinely emotional storytelling, which sounds like the setup of a joke, but that's it. That's the reason why the game's seminal ending works so well. And it's easy to hand-wave that away. Sure, it feels like you're this person, but you're just holding a controller looking at a high-definition polygon on a screen. But once you get more than 10 or so hours in, you begin to settle into the world and story, to the point that it becomes your reality. Some game mechanics will always get in the way of that, but in the case of The Last of Us, even something as fundamental as scavenging and resource management can feed back into the narrative and create a grounding and survival horror like none other, where every decision made by the player is loaded with thematic reasoning that somehow resonates with the overall narrative themes perfectly. And if you play these games non-stop like me and begin to forget what actual sunlight looks like, then that's even more true. And if you're one of those types of gamers, then I probably don't need to explain this further because you already get exactly what I mean. But if you're not, I'll spell it out like this. So many games are sold with the tagline of, "You get to be this character." When Batman Arkham Asylum first came out, the same phrase heard over and over again was, "It makes you feel like Batman." And the same goes for the Spider-Man game, because in my most humble opinion, that's the entire point of playing video games. It's all about the power fantasy of vicariously living and acting in another world, more or less fictional than our own, depending on how exaggerated the developers want, which typically doesn't have to involve a compelling story, let alone one that is heartbreakingly tragic. But of late, more and more game writers have been putting in work trying to match the awe-inspiring peaks that games like The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption, God of War, The Witcher, and so many others have reached. And I'm all for that, even if these games have fallen into similar Uncharted-esque behind-the-back third-person iconography. I don't care. Give me one of those types of games once a year and I will die happy. Yet one thing that makes me even happier is seeing live-action adaptations of those games, which sounds contradictory to everything I've said, and kinda is. But what can I say other than I'm a nerd? Obviously, I'll get hyped whenever a property I love is being turned into live action. As much as I don't necessarily want it, because I feel there is no way it could be done justice, let alone be half as good as the game, but I still wouldn't mind seeing the God of War show Amazon has been bringing up for years. And often, when something that I have poured hours into is being adapted, I'll even be more than willing to excuse any flaw, minor or major, simply because I'm just giddy to see it. Which is more true for comic book movies, where accuracy to the source material immediately shields a character's design or concept from scrutiny from me. Is that right? Probably not, but that's just how my brain works. If something is objectively dumb and people point out that it's dumb, I'm always happy to defend it if that thing was created decades ago. I mean, so long as the thing doesn't jeopardize the story, it really doesn't matter though. Not that that pertains to The Last of Us, because there's so much good stuff to mine in that story. It was one of the few adaptations that I thought should be a direct translation. Even if it was beat for beat, there's some Oscar-worthy, heartbreaking stuff there. And with the director of the games as one of the showrunners, that necessary love for the source material was going to be front and center. And of course, when talking about adaptations of previous works, it's easy to think about the waste of time they could potentially be, and I've got a whole video essay about part 1 of the new animated Watchmen movie, asking what the point of an adaptation was if there wasn't a new point of view or reason for making that new version of the same story. And there honestly isn't much reason for The Last of Us TV show to exist other than it was a great story that deserved to be told in a medium that would access more viewers than it originally did. Though even without that reasoning, I cannot give enough credit to the show. I mean, it's one of the best video game adaptations we've ever gotten, and as I've already brought up, ascended the medium in general into a stratosphere of serious and intellectual pieces of entertainment that will be remembered forever. That being said, as perfect as the HBO adaptation is, it was never going to be as good as the game, because in those moments where it truly matters, the show simply can't hit as hard. When the player starts seeing Ellie as their surrogate daughter, who they need to fill the hole that the opening moments of the game creates, and goes through so much with her, surviving trial after trial, that bond between Ellie and yourself is continuously deepened until it envelops your every thought when you boot up the game and become Joel again. It's simple and kinda dumb, but also needing to take Ellie on floating platforms to get her past any water-filled environment was a great excuse to fill the next couple minutes of gameplay with natural dialogue, but was also just a great visual cue for how much Ellie still needed Joel, despite how much she hated or didn't hate him, depending on where in the game you were. The only time you didn't play as Joel was the winter section, and if you weren't already spoiled that Ellie was a playable character, it was a massive shock to flash forward after Joel gets impaled and see Ellie step up. And you especially feel that she's matured because you're given control of her, transforming her from a timid child who still has her badass moments to a clicker-killing machine. And the reason that's masterful is twofold. First, further endearing the player to Ellie and getting them almost possessive of her in the same way they'd been possessive of Joel, you know, being them. And secondly, nourishing the feedback loop of trust between Ellie and Joel that we as the player knew was there, but are now a part of. It seems simple, but the difference of watching the characters of Joel and Ellie is a far cry from controlling Joel and Ellie. And you know what? Since I'm here, I might as well also ask, did The Last of Us need a season in between 1 and 2? Maybe. I'm honestly happy they're not doing that just because that season would have been inconsequential. I mean, the writers on this show are fantastic, but I can't help but feel I would have just been waiting for the events of the second game and felt the filler seasons between the games would have been just that, filler. The only way that I would accept a season in between is if it were completely focused on Abby. Still no spoilers for the second game, but getting the audience endeared to Abby before the main event could really do wonders for everyone not hating her, making the whole conflict later on that much more gray. Yet, for the same reason as before, it won't be as good as the game. But in general, video game adaptations should be treated like any other story, where the drama of the narrative is made the priority at every turn. I suppose structuring them with the same story as the game, or at least referencing the game, because that's what people want, but the story needs to take center stage. If you agree or disagree, drop a comment with your thoughts. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.